Hello, I'm Dan Anderson, Associate Professor and Extension Specialist at Iowa State University in the Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering. And today I'm going to talk about putting a price on poo, getting manure value, or at least as much value as we can from our manure. We can talk about this in great detail, and I often love to, but we're going to try and hit some basics and then walk through some examples to see where we end up. So, manure matters a lot in this state. Somewhere around 30% of all the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium we use to support crop production come from livestock manures. That used to be 25%, so we've been creeping up a little bit. And I think that makes it an important part of our fertility, but one that oftentimes doesn't get as much focus as maybe some of those commercial fertilizers. And that comes in part because if it's there, we're going to use it. It's just a question of how well we use it. I do think there's opportunities to maybe maximize our manure benefits that we haven't seen before. We can do a better job of nutrient management. We still see most manure plans filled out on a yield goal method, maybe using a little bit more nutrient than might be necessary to support crop production. We see a lot more focus on soil health. We've seen the government put out programs related to climate-smart agriculture. Manure has a role to play in that. There's been some interesting carbon intensity scoring, both to support carbon-neutral livestock as well as potential market opportunities related to renewable fuel production. And choosing to use manure for that fertilizer source can have a surprisingly big impact on your carbon intensity score, and it might be one of the easiest ways to do that. So I think the importance for you, if you're starting to think about using manure, want to use manure, or just want to do better with using your manure, there's potential for cost savings. You can know that you're helping improve sustainability of livestock and agricultural production systems. But it really comes down to making improved management decisions on your farm, and especially if you're buying and selling manure, figuring out what's a fair price to negotiate for both parties. Maybe not one that leaves both parties happy, but hopefully one that leaves both parties satisfied. So we'll try and talk through some of how to do that. I have 4 learning objectives for you today. The first is just we're going to work through how to assess the economic value of manure. And that's going to be looking at just what is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium worth. Certainly, we could keep extending that. We could talk about more micronutrients, sulfur, irons in it, right? Iron, copper, zinc, and how they could impact what you're doing in your cropping system. But at least on the economics, we're going to keep it focused on those macronutrients, not get lost in how carbon or soil health can influence the value of a production system. I want to talk just briefly about some of those key factors in manure utilization, how they impact the amount of value we're getting out of that manure, and how it might impact how I'm willing to pay for those nutrients. We'll talk through the regulatory aspects of manure sales. I think that's something that's important to a lot of us as we start to venture into this world. Can I just show up and buy manure today? Do I need to plan ahead? What's different between solid and liquid manure? And then as we do that, we'll talk through at least some of the best management practices for effective manure use. All right, so where I wanted to start was just assessing the economic value of manure. How do we make sure that we're working towards a fair price for both parties and paying for those nutrients? So in manure, there's 3 key nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the thing I like to say about manure is it's a complete fertilizer. It has those and all the micronutrients we need to support crop production, but it's not a balanced fertilizer. And what I mean for that is when you think about your fertilizer management plan right now, I can specify how many pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium I need, and get different fertilizer sources for those, right? Anhydrous ammonia, MAP, potash. When I work with manure, it's a one-stop shop, but everything comes all at once, and that means it doesn't always come in the right ratio. I'm showing the market prices for some different fertilizers, both nitrogens and then phosphorus and potassium there on the bottom graph, and how they've fluctuated as a function of time. We saw those huge spikes in late 2021 into 2022 when prices really topped out. And a lot of people look towards manure in those areas, those time periods, because there was an opportunity to really make an economic advantage. We have seen those prices trickle down, maybe not back to where they historically were, but that means there's still some opportunities in manure, but you have to get it priced right to make it viable for you. I'm not going to belabor sampling. Sampling is really important. If the farm you're looking to purchase manure from doesn't have a past history of manure sampling, that tends to indicate to me they're probably not making the best use of their manure, and it might mean that you can negotiate a better price because they weren't taking full advantage of it. If you want more details on how to sample from liquid manures, either from a pit or lagoon, or solid manures from different sources like poultry or beef, the publication we're showing there, How to Sample Manure for Nutrient Analysis, AE 3650, walks you through the basic principles of how to do that. If you're just wondering what are typical nutrient concentrations, the University of Minnesota put out a really neat tool recently called ManureDB. It's a manure database where many people have provided samples that they've sent over the years about what looks typical for different nutrient concentrations. I've played around with it. I think it gives a lot of insight. I would also say that the concentrations in it tend to look low for me compared to what we typically see in Iowa manure samples. And that could be for lots of reasons. When you look at the Midwest, there's a lot more housing variation. Maybe they haven't been as concerned with more manure quality as we have over the years, because Iowa, I think, has done a great job of recognizing that there's value to be had from manure, especially if we can keep those nutrient concentrations up. But if you have no other information about a farm, this database tool can provide a nice starting point of what typical concentrations might be. I just wanted to show you an example of what you might get back if you sent out a sample for manure analysis. This one happens to be a bed pack manure, so that'd be a solid manure from a beef facility using a bedded pack as their bedding material. And you can see it gets reported a couple different ways. They give you the percent nitrogen, and those are useful if you're a scientist and probably not too handy overall. The place to really look is either pounds per ton or pounds per 1,000 gallons if it's a liquid manure sample. And what you're seeing here is I really want to think about it as received basis. So that means when I show up, look at that manure, I can say that manure, after I've got that test back, had roughly 15 pounds of nitrogen, right? So I'm looking at that top total nitrogen, 15 pounds of nitrogen per ton. So when I want to set an application rate, every ton of manure I put down gets that 15 pounds. And you can see they've done the same for phosphorus, potassium, and almost every other nutrient that you could think of that you need in your crop fertilizer program. But we're really going to generally focus on what's that pound per ton. Some labs are going to try and adjust for availability, and they have different methodologies for doing that. I think looking at it pounds per ton as received is really the most fair way to do it. And then using some of our recommendations or those that your cropping advisor would support, really after that is the way to make a useful recommendation off these tools. But then you understand the assumptions of how they're assuming it's going to be applied that really impact how we can use it. This is an example table of what I think of as for typical nutrient concentrations from different livestock species and different housing facilities. Generally, that should cover most housing facilities that we have here in Iowa. There are some, obviously, that I didn't cover. For instance, you don't see a bedded pack facility for pigs. That is a way pigs can be raised. We do see a few people raising bedded pack pigs these days, but it is relatively uncommon and probably not a place that you're going to be purchasing manure from, so it didn't quite make it onto my table. Again, this is illustrative. There's a large variation in how much nutrient might be in any given facility, but this gives you a pretty good starting point of what you might expect. So you can see that we have nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. I looked at current fertilizer prices and tried to say what the value would be for those nutrients, not what the selling price should be, but what the value of those nutrients, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, would be either per 1,000 gallons or per ton. So if we're looking at a liquid manure, like would be typical for a deep pit, when you see that $49 for beef manure, that'd be $49 per 1,000 gallons. The one right below that is a bedded pack. That's going to be a solid manure, so $21. Keep in mind that 1,000 gallons is roughly 8,500 pounds. That's about 4.5 tons or so. So when you're starting comparing liquid manure to solid manures, there's a lot more material in that liquid, so the deep pit, than there is in that bedded pack. So those aren't apples to apples, but rather an apple to orange comparison, but still gives us an idea of how it sits and how we might get to think about it. As you look through the table, I'm sure the thing that jumps off at you is many of those poultry, especially the layer and the turkey manure, have some substantial value. And those are the manures that we most typically see sold here in Iowa. And those values have been high for a while. And that gives you some illustration of why they've been the most marketable manures. Those facilities get rather large, probably in places where they don't have the land base to use all the manure themselves, and that created them wanting to market it. But because those nutrient concentrations are so high, there's a real opportunity to do so. One thing that makes manure unique is that some of those nutrients are organic or attached to carbon, and some are inorganic, mineral forms, nitrate or ammonia, that can be used instantly. When you think about what you're typically using for fertilizer, either anhydrous ammonia, urea, ammonium nitrate, those fertilizers always come in the mineral form. They don't have any organic material from them. So when you put them on, they're plant available. When you know they're going to be plant available that first growing season, you can use them immediately. Manures that have lots of organic material in them, lots of organic matter, don't necessarily have all that organic nitrogen become plant available that first year we put it on and the crop can take it up. It might be a multi-year sequence for that to become plant available or usable. And a lot of this comes because there's lots of different sources of nitrogen in manure. It could be from our feed, so undigested feed, uric acid, right? Or it could come from bedding materials, things that take a little bit more time to break down. And because some of that stuff takes longer to break down, our crops just can't use that nitrogen in the first year. Here's just an illustrative example of what we typically see for ammonium concentration in different types of manure. So swine manures, almost all of it's going to be in that inorganic form, that ammonium form, the moment we put it on. So when you see that, you should think plant available, also potentially more available for movement and loss in the wrong weather conditions. With some of those other manures, especially the solid manures, we tend to see a lower amount of that nitrogen in the ammonium form the day we put it on, and it will take a little more time to become available for the plant to use it. So if you want an immediate fertilizer boost, right? So I'm side dressing and I want my plant to be able to take it up instantly. I probably want it in those mineral forms. If there's going to be a little time for it to break down, maybe that's less critical to me. It also means that on some of those manures where we have lower ammonium contents, for instance, beef feedlot or bedded beef pack, even where we might see 15 to 20% of that nitrogen in the mineral form, we might not be able to get all our nitrogen from that source. We might have to supplement it with something that is immediately available, and then think of that beef manure maybe as a longer term or a slower release fertilizer that's available for the rest of the growing season. Iowa State's done a really nice job of putting out PMR 1003 using manure nutrients for crop production, and we give our estimates, our best guess of what nitrogen is going to be available in that first year. For phosphorus and potassium, this generally isn't an issue. Most manures will have those available right away, but that nitrogen can vary substantially. So with some of our cattle manures, beef or dairy, maybe we're only thinking 30 to 50% of it becomes available in that first year. If you're using that swine manure, I really like that 100% number. My research has tended to show that that really is what's first year available, and it comes down to what time did we put it on to make sure it would stay there in the soil for us. Just an example of a location where they did this. They put on 200 pounds of total nitrogen in both cases with the turkey litter or bedded pack. They weren't adjusting for variability. And you can see that we had a real crop response difference in how well that corn was performing. Turkey litter, if you think back to that previous table, it should be somewhere around 50 to 60% first year available. That bedded pack beef manure is probably more in that 30% range. And there's definitely a growth difference in how the corn is doing early season because of that, right? So taking availability into account is extremely important here. I did want to point out that if you're getting manure where a treatment's been done, for example, solid separation, or if we've anaerobically digested that cattle manure, that isn't what PMR 1003 really was designed for. It was to handle typical or average Iowa manure handling systems. So if you start doing different things to it, I really like to go back to the old Midwest Plan Service methodology, which was assuming all that ammonium was available in the first year, and then taking a mineralization fraction on the organic nitrogen in that manure. If you start saying, well, that's a totally different method, how do they work? If you have a manure that looks pretty typical, you'll get basically what we have in that ISU table. If you get something that looks different because I have different manure handling methods, or maybe I'm using something really different as a bedding material, for example, cardboard, where it changes that, this method tends to be more accurate because the other method is calibrated for average or typical, or at least what was in the database to help support it. I wanted to follow up on that. So for adjusting for first year availability, we had the availabilities we presented before. Now I'm discounting some of that nitrogen value because it's not available in the first year. And that may or may not be an issue. If you're in a corn soybean rotation, taking credit for the first year when we grow corn, that nitrogen really provides me some value. Soybeans a legume, so any of that nitrogen that would become available in the second year isn't offering me money. I might not want to pay for it or have to pay for it if I'm negotiating a price of what that manure means to me. If I'm in a continuous corn rotation, perhaps I'm still willing to pay for some or at least a fraction of that second year available nitrogen because, well, I'm going to be in a situation to take advantage of it. So I tried to show you maybe how I would discount the price because of that first year availability. And in that other column, I'm just showing you what percentage of the value really comes from nitrogen as you think about that manure, right? So swine manure is really the one where we get more, almost 50% of all our value from nitrogen. Other manures, it's more like 30%. So many of those other manures, cattle, poultry litters, while that nitrogen is important, and especially if we're going to want to maximize value, it's important, we can think of those more as supplying phosphorus and potassium and still do a pretty good job of getting the value we need from them. One of the things that makes manure unique is it's just not very nutrient dense. And while I like to talk about Iowa having good manure, right? We get 50, 60 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons in a deep pit swine manure. Many other states in the nation will be closer to that 35, 40 pounds of nitrogen, right? We've done a nice job of trying to implement production systems that keep it concentrated compared to your commercial fertilizer where it's generally more than 50% nitrogen, we're going to be talking less than 1% nitrogen by mass, right? So we're moving a lot of material around, and that gives our application cost a lot more importance on what that value really is to us. So we surveyed the commercial manure applicator businesses in Iowa. We got responses from about 110 companies. So a pretty good response here. And just showing a graph that illustrates what it costs if you're using umbilical systems, that blue line with the triangles, or tank systems to apply manure. So generally a going rate was somewhere around 1.85 cents a gallon, just a little under 2 cents a gallon. If you're using umbilical systems and rates are going up, like we might see with deep pit beef manure or especially liquid dairy manure, we can bring that application cost down a little bit if we're using the umbilical systems. If we're tanks, that price stays pretty much the same, and it's going to be somewhere right around that 2 cents a gallon cost. If you're buying manure, that might mean you have to move it a little ways from the farm. That's going to cost more money. If we're moving liquid manure around the state, a general good first approximation of what that might cost is 4/10 of a penny per mile per gallon that you're moving it beyond the first mile. Certainly that's really site specific, right? So depending on the route you have to take from the field or how close fields are together, if we're using an umbilical system, those transport costs can differ. But as a first guess, if I'm just going to show up and say, what can I do? How much is this going to cost me? That 4/10 of a penny a mile a gallon number probably puts you pretty close as long as you're adding the application expense back to that. Same thing with solid manure. There, the transport cost generally is around 40 cents per ton mile. So once it's loaded on a truck, we can tend to move that poultry manure quite a ways. And then there is a function of application rate in terms of how much it's costing. If you're thinking that you're a layer manure, you might be in that 2 to 3 tons is a typical application rate for that. We might be paying roughly $13 a ton, give or take. You can see there's a fair amount of variation around that number, but on average, that might be a price we'd expect to pay. If you're thinking that you're more in that turkey manure sort of range, that price might be $9, $10 a ton. And if we're more in that bedded pack or open lot cattle manure, solid cattle manure number, we might be able to get the number down to $7 to $8 per ton for application. Again, there's a fair amount of variation around those numbers just because of how much manure is that facility moving, what's the shape of the fields and the efficiency that you can sort of manage. But as a general sort of number for that, that might be where you're at for a typical range. Here, I'm just trying to take what we thought that manure might be worth, showing you what I'm going to say application costs for that manure type with different rates that I thought were mostly typical for a manure. So for dairy manure, I'm probably putting on 15 to 20,000 gallons an acre. That's going to cost me about $14 an acre to get that liquid manure on. So trying to just adjust for that. So that last column there is showing you what the manure might be worth, what we might be able to get from it after we've done our application. So a thing to keep in mind there is it might change how you're doing field passes. If you are using a solid cattle manure, we might be making sure that we're doing that incorporation to get it worked in. If I was a no-till operation before, well, I've probably added a pass to my field, and that's a cost that I still might want to think about. How are we managing that or who's paying for it? If I'm injecting liquid swine manure, I might be able to say that injection works as my tillage operation and not have to do one, or at least remove a pass I was using before. So I think those are things that we might want to think about that go beyond what's the dollars and cents of what's that manure have for value and what's it cost us for getting it on. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some key things impacting what we're doing. The first one is understanding field needs. If you're managing your fertilizer well, we've seen that before, and we're going to use the same resources for manure, right? So it's Interpretation of Soil Test Results, PM 1310, and that's a great publication that talks about when you need phosphorus and potassium, how to think about getting value from those. And really, this chart isn't shown in here, but it comes from Antonio Mallarino, and it does a great job of helping me understand really how the recommendations were created and what we're trying to do. So if you're in that optimum or high zone, the chance for a yield increase is relatively low, but we're trying to manage in there to make sure our soils for the long term stay in that level where we're going to get full crop production. When we get to that very high or excessively high sort of range, oftentimes there's some limitations if we're using liquid manure in our manure plan that we might not be able to put those manures on anymore. They might have to find new fields or be more willing to sell manure. But there's really no chance or extremely low chances of getting more crop yield from that. And you're not taking advantage in those situations. So if I'm in that very high testing soil, I put phosphorus in anyway. You might say it's like putting it in the bank and saving it for later. The unfortunate part is that bank account takes negative interest. You're going to lose some of that phosphorus to the environment. So we're causing environmental harm. And it's really doing nothing to support our cropping production system for now. So it's not in the bank earning you money. It's in the bank costing you opportunity and impairing the environment. So if you have some of those fields where we can't get the phosphorus or the potassium value of the manure, it might make sense to not be paying for those nutrients and say that manure is worth less to me. I wanted to talk a little bit about at least timing of application. So on the right, I have a graph of some work that we had done. So EFM is early fall manure, in this case from deep pit swining manure. LFM is late fall manure. So my early fall manure went on roughly the beginning of October. Late fall manure went on roughly the beginning of November. And you can see I had a huge yield response from that change in timing. And if you compare them from a spring applied UAN, I had another yield response that was statistically significant. So timing made an important difference to me for 4 years of research doing that. And we saw this hold true. And then I kept doing it for 3 more years. That would be 2020, 2021, and 2022. All 3 of those years were extremely dry, and I saw no impact of timing. And it got me to think about this a little bit more firmly, a little bit more. What does timing really mean, and how should I be thinking about it? So the way I've got to now is sort of that graph on the lower portion of the screen. That's actually a summary of some data that comes out of Minnesota, and it's plotting crop yield response curves as a function of when we put it on. So you can see the rate is on the x-axis and percent of max yield in any given year is on the y-axis. And the first thing that jumps off to me is, man, there's a lot of variation from year to year and sort of what that yield response curve is going to look like. And I think we know that's true, but it's always nice to see some data on it. And then despite that, we did see timing differences. So if you think about spring manure, spring fertilization for nitrogen being sort of your standard, and say I was getting 1 unit of nitrogen from doing that, if I move from spring manure to fall manure, I'm only getting 0.8 of a unit of nitrogen on average from that fall manure. Certainly there's years where you get 100% of that value, no question, but sometimes we'll have a wet spring, we'll lose some of that nitrogen that we wanted to be there to support crop production, and it won't. Side dress gets to be a little bit more complicated, but on average, we got about 10% more extra nitrogen by improving our timing from working towards that range. Now, again, there'll be years where there's zero improvement from that timing, but if you were in a system where I was putting on my own nitrogen fertilizer, I was doing it in the spring, now I've chosen to buy manure, and for whatever reason, I have to do it in the fall. When you think about what's the value of that nitrogen in my cropping system, you might think that you have to derate that a little bit or not get full value from that in terms of what you want to pay to get that nitrogen. You do have to think about application method. Almost all our liquid manures these days are injected. Very few people are doing surface application. If you're doing direct injection or immediate incorporation with liquid or solid manures, almost all that nitrogen, as soon as we get into contact with the soil, does a great job staying in the soil. If we're leaving it on the soil surface for extended periods of time, some of that nitrogen is going to the atmosphere. It's volatilized or lost as ammonia. So especially if you're taking solid manure, putting it on in late fall, if we don't get that tillage operation done, we might be losing something like 15 to 30% of all the nitrogen that was attached to the manure. Again, if I'm buying manure and that's the situation that I find myself in, I'm probably going to try and negotiate a rate where I'm not paying for all the nitrogen I bought from you, but rather what nitrogen I think I can actually take advantage of in my cropping system. Just a picture to do that, right? So just because you're running injection equipment doesn't necessarily mean you're getting good injection. If I'm in that cornfield on the left, manure was injected in there, I can't see a drop. It's been 5 minutes. Probably have a good chance of all that nitrogen staying in the soil, being there to support crop production, not lost during application. On the other hand, if I run that same thing in a compacted field where I can't get good injection, the manure is sitting in my trench, I can see it, there's a chance I can probably smell it, and if I can smell it, I'm losing some of that nitrogen. I might want to think about those two situations differently in terms of both what I'm getting and how I'd want to monetize what I'm willing to pay for those. I think the big thing is get your manure injected or incorporated as soon as possible. Focus on getting to fields where phosphorus and potassium are needed. We really saw that that's of value to us. Think about rotation and matching NPK over the years. For example, if you're taking deep pit swine manure, oftentimes they're close to balance for a corn soybean rotation. And that might mean we get to cut out some fertilizer passes in the future, right? So that's something that we can really take advantage of. And then the big thing is taking credit for those nutrients. Too often we see people taking only partial credit or not doing the things they need to take full advantage of those manure nutrients. And it really can be an important part of our fertilizer system. Right now, as I mentioned, we're taking about 30% of all the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium we need in Iowa from livestock manure. Given what we excrete, if we would improve our application and utilization management decisions, we could get that number up to 35-40%, right? So there's opportunities for improvement based on what we're doing now, not even changing manure storages. If we choose to improve some of our manure storages to minimize some losses during storage, we can maybe get close to 50%. So while we're doing a good job, there's definitely room for improvement in how we optimize some of those management or uses. I did want to at least touch on some of the regulatory or transactional aspects of manure. So the first one comes down to who needs a manure plan. And manure plans are important because they're related to if your field is in a manure plan, it needs to have soil samples that are less than 4 years old, and it needs to have a phosphorus index that has been run and approved before manure can be applied on those fields. For the most part, if manure is coming from a confinement animal feeding operation, so if animals are housed in a barn essentially, and they have more than 500 animal units, we're going to need a manure plan. All right. So if it's confinement, liquid manure, and more than 500 animal units, we need a manure plan. You need to plan ahead. I can't show up and say, hey, I'd like to get manure from you today because we need to have that paperwork filled in. We need to be in their manure plan. It also means that that manure plan will be approved for 4 years. So they probably don't want me on a year to year purchasing schedule where I say yes this year and no next year, because that could leave them in a bind with where can they actually take their manure. So those oftentimes will require a little bit longer contract and a little bit more planning to make sure that we're in compliance. On the other hand, if we're working with solid manure, that can be bought and sold under Chapter 200A of Iowa Code. That's selling it as a soil amendment. If it's sold under that regulation, it doesn't need a manure plan. So that's typical of our solid manures, often poultry litters, but cattle manures can fall under that as well. If you're able to do that, you don't need that manure plan. I can make a year-to-year decision. I will have to work with the manure broker to make sure that they have manure to sell me, but it is a year-to-year decision at that point. In either case, manure can be bought and sold. So if I have liquid manure, as long as it's in that manure plan, we can work out an agreement where I'm paying for that manure, but it needs to be in that farm's manure plan to be accounted for. If the manure comes from a livestock animal feeding operation with more than 500 animal units, whether it's liquid or solid, the manure applicator has to be certified. So make sure you're coming in and getting training in that case. So if you're going to buy manure and say, I have this old manure spreader sitting out back, I still plan to do it by myself, but that manure comes from a confinement animal feeding operation, the person doing the application, in that case, you would still need to be certified. So just making sure you're doing what you need to be in compliance with the law. And then there is some record keeping that's required. If you're buying or selling manure, make sure there's a bill of sale. It should include both the price and the amount of manure that was sold. If you need to be in a manure plan, you have to keep some records about date, rate of applied, the field applied to, and the total amount of manure. I'd also recommend you make notes on what was the weather conditions, how did it go for you, did you notice anything that went either extremely well or extremely poorly, like we missed a quarter of the field for whatever reason, or a hose broke in this part of the field, or the manure distribution didn't just look right, because as we work through some of the challenges that we'll see, that can be important for negotiating later. There are some practical challenges in these negotiations and things that, as you think about working out a contract, you want to talk about. One might be timing. For instance, you might write in there, I won't take manure before November 1st or November 15th, or make sure you're not applying over Thanksgiving when I host my family in the field that is right next to our house. If you have constraints like that, it's important to get them worked out and into the contract. If they're not in the contract, sometimes when push comes to shove, we'll make decisions that aren't ideal for both people, right? And it's trying to make apples or lemonade out of lemons in some cases because we just couldn't get it done when we needed to because the weather wasn't cooperating. But if there are those must-haves, making sure you're negotiating them. The other thing to think about is oftentimes we're using commercial manure applicators to put on that manure. They're going to rely on you to have that field harvested and ready by the time they get there. If it isn't, we might fall somewhere else on the list. We might not be able to get manure this year. So just make sure you understand who's responsible for what and what happens if some of these things don't happen. One I did want to comment on is, hey, we went through and there's just a bunch of trash in the field. Manure is a valuable added product, yet sometimes we still see people throwing garbage into manure pits for whatever reason. And that can be a problem, right? If you know that that farm has a history of that, or you see a field with trash in it, make sure that you're negotiating out what's going to happen, right? So if it comes from a dairy and for whatever reason they ended up with some tires in that manure because it was on their silage pile and it ended up in solid manure because there was spoilage of that silage, what's going to be the situation and how does this get rectified? There might be a situation where it's wet and we have to go anyway, right? So I've seen situations where they say it was mudded on and the field is wrecked. Who gets to make the call? Does the farm with the manure, knowing that they have to get that storage empty, make the call? So these things should be discussed beforehand and come to some sort of agreement about what's going to happen. How do we manage some of these situations? I think buyers have lots of questions. We need to hear something about reliability, handling logistics. How is this going to work, especially when it's your first time purchasing manure? When you've had some of that happen before, I think it gets to be a little bit easier because you know the system and how to ask some of those important questions. The same thing comes when you're selling manure. If you give it away, it's going to be hard to sell it in the future, right? You sort of set that market price. But if you sell it to someone and it doesn't have the nutrients or it doesn't supply nutrients the way they think it should, that's going to be some trust issues long term, and it might be hard to keep them a buyer. So, working to make sure that they have success with the manure, giving them tips about what you've seen work for you, what you haven't seen work for you, is extremely important to making sure that it's a satisfactory experience for both people, and we can keep that sale working long term. The other thing I wanted to mention is it's a negotiation. So, I can tell you what nutrients are worth. I've shown some tables of that. But the truth is, the devil's in the details, and both sides have to leave a negotiation satisfied. That doesn't necessarily mean happy. Neither side probably got everything they wanted, but this is a place where we want it to work for at least both people. I did want to show just an example of maybe there's opportunities to sell manure that we haven't seen before. So let's say we have a beef farmer. He's always used only his manure, and the field no longer needs phosphorus or potassium because he's put manure on so long. Should he or she sell the manure in this case? And if you'd say, I have bedded pack manure, I value the nutrients at $21 a ton, right? And let's say I can sell it for 10, and they're going to handle the application for that. So I'm not selling it for full value. I'm definitely taking a discount there. If you think about where I was, if I was that farmer putting manure on before, I was getting about $2.22 worth of nitrogen value if I was putting on 10 tons an acre or trying to claim credit for 60 pounds of nitrogen, minus whatever my application would be. I was probably taking that manure and using it myself for a loss because I'm not taking any value from that phosphorus, potassium. I might now be selling it for 10 and I could say, well, it's worth more than that. It's worth more than that. I wasn't taking value from that, right? It wasn't offering me value. So even in that situation where I'm giving a pretty substantial discount, both of us could come ahead. I come get some money to apply towards my nitrogen purchase, and I have to purchase a little bit more now. And you got a discounted fertilizer that hopefully you can need. But I think when you look at those situations, we see a fair amount of that, of fields that have had a long history of manure that are enriched in phosphorus and potassium. Don't see a yield response from using that, where there's an opportunity to put it to fields where it can do a little bit better for us, even if we aren't marketing for full value or even a high value, where both parties can come out ahead compared to what their current fertilization practices were at the current moment. So, as we finish up here, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can see that I am still on X as Dr. Manure. We Facebook as the Iowa State Manure and Nutrient Management Lab. You can see both my phone number and email there. We run a podcast called Talking Crap. So, if you really want to hear lots more about manure, sometimes it's about nutrient management, sometimes it's about other topics related to manure, odor, carbon intensity, anaerobic digestion, what have you. And then finally, I did want to mention that QR code on the right. Not only does it have a beautiful dragline image in it, it will take you to our Iowa Manure Management Action Group webpage, where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter or get a bunch of information about what's happening in the world of manure at any given moment. So with that, thank you for your time. Hopefully you understand a little bit more about the potential value for manure nutrients and can help make better fertilizer decisions and make better use of our manure resources within the state. Thank you.